The dust was the first thing. It was the first enemy, the one that came before all others. It was in the air Clara breathed, in the water she hauled, in the cracked, sun-scorched lines of her own hands. It coated the porch of the small ranch house and settled in the folds of the thin blanket covering her father. This was New Mexico territory, 1874, and the land was dying. Or perhaps it was already dead, and they were just ghosts haunting it. The ranch sat perched on the high, dry lip of a desert ravine, a deep scar in the earth that promised only shadows and a sheer drop. The drought had lasted 2 years, or maybe 3. Clara had lost count. The sun rose each morning not as a promise, but as a judgment. It baked the adobe clay of their home into a kiln and bleached the sky to a pale, hateful white. Their livestock was gone. The few cattle they had managed to keep after the last raid had long since been skeletal. And then they were just bones. The creek bed was a ribbon of powdered stone. Clara spent her days mending fences that enclosed nothing, pulling water from a well that gave less and less, her muscles burning with a dull, constant ache. She was 22, but her body felt ancient. She did all of it alone. Inside the stifling dimness of the house, her father, Elias, lay wasting. His breath was a shallow rasp, his cough a dry tearing sound that echoed the cracked land outside. He was a good man, a kind man, and now he was just a weight in a bed, his eyes clouded with remedies that did not work and a shame that was killing him faster than the sickness. Clara moved through the rooms with a forced, quiet efficiency. She boiled cornmeal mush he could barely swallow, wiped his brow with a damp rag, and listened to his fitful murmuring of her mother's name. She never cried. Tears were a luxury, like river water. At night, the desert silence pressed in. It was an emptiness so vast it felt solid. She would lie on her thin corn-husk mattress, fully clothed, and listen to the coyotes, the skittering of unseen things, and the pounding of her own heart. Under the mattress, tucked near the frame, lay her pistol. It was a heavy, cold piece of metal. Her husband, Samuel, had taught her to use it before he died. She checked it every night, not from habit, but from a deep, gnawing dread. The drought had starved the land, and starvation made men desperate. It made them predators. She was alone out here, miles from the nearest town, with a sick father and a broken ranch. She was a target. The pistol was her only answer. The dread had a name, and that name was Harrow. He arrived one afternoon when the heat was at its worst, a black shape shimmering in the midday glare. Harrow was not a rancher. He was a landowner. He owned the bank in town. He owned the water rights farther up the valley. And he owned the debts of nearly everyone, including Elias. Clara saw his dust trail long before he arrived. She wiped her hands on her canvas trousers and stood on the porch, feeling the grit between her teeth. She did not bother to smooth her hair, which was pulled back in a tight, functional braid. Harrow rode a fine black gelding that looked sleek and well-fed, a dark insult to the starved landscape. He dismounted slowly, a large man in a dark waistcoat and a clean shirt. He removed his hat, revealing slick, graying hair. "Miss Clara," he said. His voice was smooth, like oiled wood. "Mr. Harrow." He looked past her, at the empty corral, at the dry water trough, at the shuttered window of her father's room. His gaze missed nothing and approved of nothing. "Times are hard," he observed, stating the obvious as if it were a profound discovery. "They are. I came to see your father, to discuss his outstanding obligations." "He's not well, Mr. Harrow. He's in bed." "So I have heard." Harrow stepped onto the porch, invading her small space of shade. He smelled of soap and tobacco, alien scents in her world of dust and sickness. It is a terrible burden for a young woman to bear alone. Clara said nothing. She would not give him the satisfaction of her fear. "I am a reasonable man," Harrow continued, turning his hat in his hands. I have always been a friend to your father. I wish to remain one." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the word friend settle. "My son, Thomas," he said, and Clara's stomach tightened into a cold knot. "He speaks of you often. He finds you admirable, a woman of substance. He says—" Thomas Harrow was a cruel boy trapped in a man's body, known for his heavy hands and his mean, laughing eyes. He had a reputation with the saloon girls in town, and none of it was good. The thought of him speaking of her made her skin crawl. "My son is ready to settle down," Harrow said, his voice dropping into a confidential tone. "He needs a good wife, a strong woman to manage his affairs. He has a great deal of land, you know. He will be a very wealthy man." Clara's hands fisted at her sides. She could see the shape of the trap forming. "I don't know what that has to do with my father's debts, Mr. Harrow." Harrow finally looked at her. His eyes were pale blue, as cold and empty as the sky. "It has everything to do with them, girl. A marriage is an alliance, a joining of families. Were you to become my daughter-in-law, your father's troubles, well, they would simply disappear. I would consider his debts paid in full, a wedding gift, you might say." The threat was no longer veiled. It was laid bare on the dusty porch. Marry his cruel son, or be ruined. From inside the house came the sound of Elias coughing, a weak, desperate hack that tore at Clara's composure. "He is too weak to object, is he not?" Harrow murmured, his gaze shifting to the door. He knew. He knew her father had no fight left. He knew the decision was hers alone. Clara felt the ravine at her back, the sheer drop. She was trapped. There was no escape. She was being bartered for, like the last of the livestock. "You think on it," Harrow said, placing his hat back on his head. He stepped off the porch. "Thomas will come calling in a few days. See that you are hospitable." He mounted his horse, looked down at her one last time, and rode away. Clara stood there until his dust was gone, until the only sound was the dry wind and the sickness in the next room. That night, she did not just check the pistol. She held it, the weight of it a cold comfort in her shaking hand. The storm broke 3 nights later. It was a violent, sudden affair, as if the sky, having held its breath for months, was finally tearing itself apart. The wind came first, howling down the ravine, rattling the shutters, and driving sheets of rain horizontally against the small house. Thunder cracked directly overhead, loud enough to shake the floorboards. Clara sat at her father's bedside, humming softly, trying to calm him. The storm agitated him. He thought the noise was cannon fire from a war fought long ago. Then, through the roar of the wind and the pounding rain, she heard it. It was not the storm. It was a sound from the barn, a splintering of wood, a heavy thud, and then a muffled groan. Her blood went cold. A predator, animal or human, it did not matter. She looked at her father. He had drifted back into a restless sleep. She slipped out of the chair, moved to her room, and retrieved the pistol from under the mattress. She checked the load, her hands steady now, all fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She would not be taken. She would not be Harrow's property, and she would not be a victim in her own home. She pulled on her boots and a heavy oilskin coat, lit a lantern, and stepped out into the deluge. The wind nearly tore the lantern from her hand. The rain was icy, stinging her face. The short walk to the barn felt like a mile. The barn door was hanging crookedly on one hinge, likely battered open by the wind. She raised the lantern, the pistol held tight in her other hand. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice nearly stolen by the wind. "I'm armed." Only the storm answered. She slipped inside, the smell of wet hay, old manure, and something else, something metallic, like blood, filling her lungs. The lantern light swung wildly, casting monstrous shadows. "I said, show yourself." A noise, A rustling from the far corner, by the empty stalls, where she kept the few remaining sacks of grain. She moved toward it, raising the lantern high. "I won't ask again." The grain sacks shifted. A shape moved, tried to rise, and fell back with a pained sound. She saw him. He was a man, or what was left of one. He was caked in mud from head to toe, his clothes torn to rags. He was half-starved, his face gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath a growth of dark beard. One hand was pressed to his side, and she could see the dark stain spreading even through the mud and rain. Wounded. He looked up at her, his eyes wide in the lantern light. And he did not look like a predator. He looked like prey. "Please," he whispered, his voice a raw croak. He raised a shaking hand, not to fight, but to plead. "Don't scream, please." Clara did not scream. She stepped forward and leveled the pistol directly at his chest. Her hand was shaking, but not from the cold. He was frightening, yes, a strange man. Wounded, hiding in her barn. Every instinct screamed danger. But as the lantern light settled on his face, she saw past the mud and the blood. She saw his eyes. They were not cruel, like Thomas Harrow's. They were not cold, like his father's. They were gray, and they were hollowed out, empty, as if he had seen the end of the world and had been living there for a long time. They were filled with a weariness so profound it went beyond suffering and into something else entirely. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice tight. "It doesn't matter," he rasped, coughing. I'm just trying to get out of the storm." "You're bleeding." "I know." He tried to shift, and a sharp intake of breath told her the pain was deep. She kept the gun trained on him. Duty said she should shoot him, or at least drive him back out into the storm. Instinct, a small, trembling thing she had not felt in years, held her back. "You're a fugitive," she said. It was not a question. His eyes met hers. There was no denial, only a terrible, stark honesty. "Yes," he licked his cracked lips. "They say I killed a U.S. Marshal back in Arizona." "A marshal?" Her grip on the pistol tightened. A federal lawman. This man was not just a drifter, he was a killer. "I didn't do it," he said, and a dry, bitter laugh escaped him. "But I know. You won't believe me. No one does." He looked at the gun in her hand, then back at her face. He seemed to be measuring her, not as a threat, but as a person. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto one elbow. The movement cost him, his face going pale beneath the grime. He reached out his muddy hand, not for her, not for the gun, but just open. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Clara." The name escaped her before she could stop it. "Clara," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "I'm Levi Callahan." He saw the hesitation in her, the war between her fear and her something else. Then he did the last thing she ever expected. With a groan, he pushed himself forward, closing the small distance between them. Clara flinched, her finger tightening on the trigger. But he did not grab for her. He grabbed her hand, the one holding the pistol, and he pulled it toward him. "Levi, no!" she breathed, terrified. He pressed the muzzle of her own gun firmly against his chest, right over his heart. His hand was cold and shaking, but his grip was firm. "You want to survive?" he said, his voice ragged but intense. His hollowed eyes locked on hers. "So do I, but this world ain't kind to survivors." He pushed the gun harder into his own flesh. "You can shoot me. Right now. There's a bounty. You could collect it, save your ranch. Or you can let me stay, just until morning, just until the storm passes." He let out a shuddering breath, a tremor running through his entire body. The cold was getting to him, the shock. "But if I freeze," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I die, here in your barn. So you choose. Clara, but choose now." He released her hand, Leaving the gun pressed to his chest, he left the choice entirely, terribly in her hands. He tried to hold his position, but his strength was gone. His eyes rolled back. He stumbled in the mud and straw, his legs giving way, and collapsed onto the barn floor. He did not move. Clara stood frozen. The storm raged outside. The man, Levi, lay at her feet, a dark, muddy heap. He was a fugitive, a killer, maybe a liar. Almost certainly. She should leave him. She should go back inside, bolt the door, and pray he was gone by morning. Or she should finish it, right here, and take the consequences. But she looked at his face, slack in the mud. She saw the lines of suffering, the exhaustion that went bone deep. She saw the man who had given her back her gun. He was a dying man. She hesitated. The rain drummed on the roof. Her father coughed in the house. Harrow's face swam in her memory. Trapped. She lowered the pistol. "Damn you," she whispered. "To him. To the world." She grabbed the front of his ragged, wet shirt. He was heavier than he looked. A dead weight. She put the pistol in the pocket of her coat and used both hands, hauling him up. He groaned, barely conscious. She dragged him, out of the barn, across the few yards of churning mud, and into the house. The effort made her breath tear in her throat. She got him inside, leaving a trail of mud and water on the floor, and barred the door. Her father was still asleep, his breathing loud in the sudden quiet, punctuated only by the rain. She dragged Levi not to her room, not to her father's, but to the safest place, by the stove. The kitchen stove was cold, but it was the center of the house. She let him slump to the floor by the hearth. He was shivering violently now, his whole body shaking in a way that scared her. It was not just the cold. It was the ague, the fever from his wound, the deep, rattling shock. She lit a small fire in the stove, just a few pieces of precious wood, the small room filled with a flickering, orange light. In the shadows, he looked less like a man and more like a bundle of wet rags. She brought a blanket, the one from her own bed, and threw it over him. His teeth chattered, a desperate rhythmic sound. She sat on the floor, on the other side of the stove, the pistol now in her lap. She just watched him. He was in and out of consciousness. Hours passed. The storm quieted to a steady drumming. The fire crackled. In the deepest part of the night, his eyes opened. They were clear. He looked at the fire, then at her. "Why?" he croaked. "I don't know," Clara said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "You're freezing." "You should have shot me." "Maybe." They sat in silence. The shadows danced. The only other sound was her father's breathing from the next room. It was a strange, impossible peace. Two lost souls, hiding from the world by a dying fire. "I'm a widow," Clara said, the words coming out before she could think. She had not spoken of it in a year. Levi turned his head slowly. His eyes found hers in the dim light. "My husband, Samuel," she whispered, looking at the fire. "He died 2 years ago, during a cattle raid. He went out to fight them, and he just didn't come back." She had told no one the emptiness of it, the sudden, silent space he had left. Levi watched her. He did not offer pity. He did not say he was sorry. He just listened, as if he understood what it meant to have something ripped away. "Loss," he murmured, his voice thick. "It's the only thing that's real, isn't it?" Their eyes met and held. A current passed between them, something that had nothing to do with the storm, or the gun, or the debt. It was a shared, raw understanding. The air in the small kitchen turned thick, charged with a sudden, terrifying weight of two people seeing each other's deepest wounds. Clara trembled, but it was not from fear. It was the first tremor of something else, something she had buried with Samuel. Feeling. Levi's hand, still caked in drying mud, moved from beneath the blanket. It crept across the few inches of floor between them. He did not try to grab her. He just laid his hand out, palm up, a silent offering. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face, hollowed by the firelight. She did not pull away. Clara woke with a jerk. The kitchen cold. The fire in the stove was dead ash, and the gray, pre-dawn light creeping through the window was thin and unforgiving. She was alone. The space by the hearth where he had lain was empty. The blanket she had given him was folded, not neatly, but deliberately, placed on the seat of the small chair by the stove. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. Had it been a dream? A fever vision brought on by the storm and her own crushing loneliness? No. The floor was proof. A long, dark smear of mud and dried blood stained the planks, leading from the door to the hearth and back again. He was real, and he was gone. She stood, her body stiff from sleeping in the chair. She felt a hollow, aching void where the man had been. It was an absurd, foolish feeling. He was a fugitive, a danger. His leaving was a blessing. It meant he had not died in her barn, and he had not brought the law down on her and her father. He had kept his word, stayed until morning, and then vanished with the storm. She should have been relieved. But she also felt a sharp, cutting disappointment that stole her breath. She had sat in the dark and spoken of Samuel. He had laid his hand out. She had not taken it, and now he was gone. Then she saw it, on the blanket, a small, torn piece of a feed sack, dirt brown, with words scrawled on it in what looked like charcoal from the stove. His handwriting was rough, slanted. Didn't want to cause trouble. You should be free, but thank you. She picked it up. You should be free. The words were a bitter joke. She was anything but free. She was chained to this dying land, to her sick father, and to the looming, ugly bargain with Mr. Harrow. Levi Callahan, the wounded fugitive, was the one who was free. Free to run. Free to choose his own path, even if it was a path to the gallows. Clara closed her hand around the scrap of paper, her knuckles white. Thank you. No one had thanked her for anything in a very long time. That day, the sun returned with a vengeance. The storm had washed the dust from the air, but it had left the ground a steaming, sticky mud that would soon bake to iron. Her father was weaker, his breathing more shallow after the turbulent night. His laudanum was running low. She had no choice. She had to go to town. She hitched their one remaining mule, old Benjamin, to the small utility wagon. The ride was 5 miles, and it took her nearly 2 hours. The town was little more than a single dusty street, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled against the relentless sun, a general store, a saloon, a bank, and a smithy. She kept her head down, as she always did. A woman alone drew eyes. Men sitting on the porch of the saloon stopped talking as she passed, their gazes heavy, speculative. She was the widow from the ravine, the one whose land Harrow coveted. They all knew. In this place, everyone's business was everyone else's misery. She tied the mule outside the general store and went inside, the small bell over the door tinkling. Mr. Davies, the proprietor, was a thin man who looked as dried out as the land. Miss Clara. He nodded, his eyes already calculating her meager order. Mr. Davies, I need cornmeal and a bottle of Mr. Gurney's tincture for Pa. Credit's a bit thin. Clara, he said, not unkindly, but firmly. It's for my father's pain, she said, her voice flat. Mr. Harrow will cover it. Put it on his account for us. She hated saying the name. It tasted like ash. Mr. Davies's expression softened slightly. He knew what that name meant. He turned to get the bottle from a high shelf. It was then that she saw it, tacked to the wall by the door, right next to a notice for a county fair that would never happen. It was a bounty poster, freshly printed, the ink still dark. Wanted. A name, in thick black letters, Levi Callahan. Below it, a crude drawing that looked nothing like the man who had collapsed in her barn. This man was a monster, all shadows and menace. The man she had seen was just broken for the murder of Utes Marshall Elias Thorne. Clara's blood ran cold. Elias, the same name as her father, a cruel trick of the universe. $500, dead or alive? $500. That was more money than she had ever seen. It was enough to pay Harrow, enough to buy seed, to hire a hand, to dig a new well. It was enough to save the ranch. It was enough to save her. All she had to do was kill a man. Or, worse, all she had to do, she realized with a sickening lurch, was have killed him. When he was at her feet, when he had offered her the gun. You want to survive? You can shoot me. He had been offering her a fortune. He had been offering her an escape. And she had dragged him into her house instead. Her fingers trembled. Not with greed, not with fear, with a sudden, white-hot, protective rage. Mr. Davies returned, placing the bottle and the sack on the counter. That'll be all? Clara's eyes were still on the poster. She reached out, her hand moving before her mind could stop it. She gripped the corner of the poster and tore it from the wall, the nail ripping the paper. Miss Clara, Davies exclaimed, startled. She ignored him, crumpling the paper in her fist. She threw her coins on the counter. Not enough, never enough, and grabbed her supplies. Put the rest on Mr. Harrow's account, she said, her voice shaking. She walked out of the store, the bell jangling furiously behind her. She did not stop. She untied the mule, threw the supplies in the wagon, and headed out of town, the crumpled poster burning a hole in her hand. When she was a mile out, in the silence of the desert, she stopped the wagon. She got down, her legs unsteady. She walked behind a large boulder, out of sight of the road. She smoothed the poster out on the hot rock. Levi Callahan, dead or alive. She took the matchbox from her wagon supply kit. Her fingers fumbled, but she struck one. The flame licked at the paper. She watched the ink blacken, the menacing face curl into ash. She watched the name Elias Thorne disappear. She watched the $500 turn to smoke. She was an accomplice now. She had chosen. That night, the house was quieter than it had ever been. The silence was absolute. Her father's breathing was a thin, frail thread in the darkness. Clara sat in the kitchen, the pistol on the table. She was not waiting for Harrow's son. She was not waiting for raiders. She was waiting for him. She knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, that he would be back. He was free. Yes, but he was also wounded and hunted. The desert was an ocean, and he was a sinking ship. Her ranch was the only island for 100 miles. The sound came just after midnight. Not a groan in the barn, but a desperate, fumbling scrape at her front door. She grabbed the pistol. She moved to the door, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. Who is it? A groan. Clara. It was his voice, wrecked with pain. She unbarred the door and threw it open. He fell inside, collapsing onto the very floor he had bled on the night before. This time, the blood was fresh. His shirt, the one she had seen in the dim light of the barn, was torn at the side, soaked in a dark, arterial red. Heavens, she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. Tried, he gasped, his face pale as bone, slick with sweat. Tried to keep going, headed for the mountains. They spotted me, at the ridge. Who? Hunters, bounty hunters, not law. He gritted his teeth, his body arching in a spasm of pain. A bullet, just a graze, I think, but it won't stop. He had come back. He had tried to honor his note, to leave her free, but the world had sent him back to her door. You're a fool, Levi Callahan, she whispered, her voice thick. I know, he breathed. She put the pistol on the table. She hauled him, her strength surprising her. He was lighter than before, as if the blood loss was hollowing him out. She did not take him to the stove. The floor was too cold, too hard. She took him to her room. She pushed open the door. The hinges creaked and half dragged, half lifted him onto her bed. Her bed. The one where she had slept alone since Samuel died. The one where she had hidden her pistol. He fell onto her mattress, soiling her sheets with his blood and the mud of the trail. He looked at the clean, simple room, her mother's dresser, the small wooden cross on the wall, and a deep, burning shame filled his eyes. He tried to push himself up. "No, I can't. Not here." "Lie still," she commanded, her voice hard. "You'll lie where I put you, or you'll die on my floor. It's your choice." He collapsed back, his breath coming in ragged pants. He said nothing, just watched her as she lit a lantern, his eyes tracking her every move, vulnerable, exposed, and deeply ashamed. She fetched the water basin, clean rags, and the whiskey she kept for her father's pain. "This will hurt," she said. She cut away the fabric of his shirt. The wound was a long, ugly tear along his ribs. A graze, as he'd said, but deep. The bullet had ripped the flesh. She poured the whiskey directly into the wound. Levi did not scream. He roared, a deep, guttural sound that he bit off, his whole body going rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the bedding. "Hold still," she said, her own hands shaking as she began to clean the wound. He panted, the worst of the pain passing. "You have a hard touch," he gasped. "I have a hard life," she replied. She bandaged him tightly, her movements efficient. He was vulnerable, stripped of all his defenses. This was not the man who had pressed her gun to his chest. This was a boy bleeding in her bed. When she was done, she pulled the blanket over him. He was already shivering. She went to the kitchen and returned with a tin cup of water. She held his head, helping him drink. He swallowed, his eyes closing in gratitude. She sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted. The small room was filled with the smell of his blood, the whiskey, and the faint, dusty scent of her own loneliness. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, so quietly she barely heard herself. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, his gaze clear and sharp, cutting through the pain. Clara made a decision. She was tired of the cold floor. She was tired of being alone. She lay down on the covers, beside him, her boots still on, her clothes still smelling of dust and the burning poster. She was fully clothed, a wall of fabric between them, but she was there. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. He lay beside her, rigid, not moving. The silence in the room was absolute, only the sound of her father's coughing, muffled, from the other room. Then she heard it, a small, choked sound. She turned her head. Levi Callahan was crying. Not loudly, it was a silent, terrible weeping. His shoulders shook, his face was turned away from her, but she saw the tears tracking through the grime on his temples, disappearing into his hair. He was crying for the pain, for the running, for the marshal, for the life that had been stolen from him. She did not speak. She did not offer words of comfort. They were useless. Instead, she reached out her hand in the dark. She found his arm, the one not pressed to his wounded side. His muscles were corded, tight with pain and grief. She placed her hand on his forearm and just stroked it, gently, a slow, steady rhythm, up and down, a simple, human touch. She was not a wife, not a lover, not a victim. She was just a woman, in a room, with a man who was broken. He did not pull away. After a long time, his breathing deepened, the silent tears slowed. He did not sleep, but he rested, and she stayed there, her hand on his arm, through the long, dark hours, until the first gray light of dawn. They came 2 days later. Levi was still weak, confined to her bed. But the fever had not taken hold. Clara was in the kitchen, boiling potatoes. When she heard the horses, not one, many, she looked out the window. Her heart stopped. Mr. Harrow and his son, Thomas, and 3 other men, hired hands, all armed. Levi heard it, too. He was already trying to get out of bed, his face pale with alarm. Clara, stay down, she whispered, a fierce, cold calm settling over her. Do not move. Do not make a sound. They'll find me. Clara, you have to run. I am not running. She went to the bed. Get under it, now. He was too weak to argue. He slid off the bed, wincing as his wound pulled, and rolled under the high iron frame, disappearing into the shadows and dust bunnies. Clara smoothed the blanket on the bed, her hands moving quickly. She kicked his muddy boots under the dresser. She took a deep breath, walked out of the bedroom, closed the door, and went onto the porch. They were dismounting, a small army taking over her yard. Thomas Harrow, a thick-bodied man with his father's cold eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth, was staring at her, his gaze lingering on her body in a way that made her want to bathe in lye. Miss Clara, Mr. Harrow said, his voice as smooth as ever. A fine morning. It was, she said. My son, Thomas, was eager to come and pay his respects. To you, and to your father. My father is sleeping, she said. Of course. Harrow's gaze swept the ranch. We're looking for strays. Tough times. As you know, men get desperate. We heard rumors of a vagrant, a dangerous man, seen in these parts. His eyes pinned her. You're all alone out here, save for a sick old man? You haven't seen anyone unusual, have you? This was it, the moment, the ravine at her back. Clara looked directly into Mr. Harrow's pale blue eyes. She did not flinch. She thought of the man under her bed, the one who had cried in the dark. No, sir, she said, her voice clear and cold as well water. I haven't seen anyone, unusual or otherwise. We don't get many visitors. Thomas laughed, a short, ugly bark. Maybe you're not looking hard enough. Clara, maybe we should help you search. Check the barn, check the house, make sure you're safe. He took a step toward the porch. Clara did not move, but her hand drifted to the pistol she now wore on her hip, in a holster Samuel had left behind. This is my house, Thomas, she said, her voice low. And my father is sick. You are not to disturb him. If you've lost strays, I suggest you look for them, but you won't find them here. Harrow's eyes narrowed. He saw the gun. He saw her face. This was not the frightened girl he had tried to barter with. This was someone else. He held up a hand to his son. Thomas, that's enough. He turned back to Clara. Forgive my son's eagerness. He is merely concerned for your safety. I am safe, Clara said. Harrow stared at her for a long, silent moment. She could feel Levi under the floorboards, barely breathing. She could feel the weight of the lie. Very well, Harrow said finally. Turning, we will leave you in peace. For now. He mounted his horse. Thomas lingered, his eyes full of a dark promise. We'll be back, Clara, soon. They rode away. Clara stood on the porch, her hand on the gun, until their dust was a smudge on the horizon. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. She went back inside, her legs shaking so badly she had to sit on the kitchen chair. A moment later, Levi crawled out from under the bed. He was covered in dust, his face white. He staggered into the kitchen, leaning against the door frame, his wound clearly agonizing him. He just looked at her. He had heard it all. He had heard her lie. He had heard her defiance. He was in awe. You saved me. I saved my home, she said, though it was only half the truth. That night, the wall of silence between them finally crumbled. He was sitting at the kitchen table, shirtless, while she changed his bandage. The wound was angry, but it was not festering. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low. "Harrow, his son, he wants this place, and he wants you." "I know." "You should have let them take me. You should have given me up. The bounty—" "Be quiet, Levi," she said. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, but it stopped her. "No, I won't. You need to know. You can't. You can't protect me, not when you know what I am." "I know what you are," she said. "You're a man bleeding on my kitchen chair." "I'm a killer, Clara." His eyes were desperate. He needed her to know. He needed her to be the judge. "I was on a prison chain gang," he said, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "In Arizona, it was hell, the sun, the rocks, the guards." He closed his eyes. "There was a marshal, Thorne, Elias Thorne. He was a bastard. He hated us. He liked the sound a whip made." He took a breath. "There was another prisoner, an old man. His name was Elias, too, same as your pa. He fell, just collapsed from the heat. Thorne, he started beating him with the butt of his rifle. He was going to kill him, just beating him to a pulp, laughing." Levi's voice cracked. I couldn't watch it. I yelled at him. He turned. He came at me. I stepped in. I just tried to stop it. I pushed him, just pushed him to get him off the old man." He looked at his hands. "He was on the edge of a quarry. He fell. He fell. A long way. He didn't get up." He looked at Clara, his eyes pleading. "They said I did it. They said I planned it, that I murdered a federal marshal. The old man, Elias, he died that night anyway. There was no one to say what really happened. So I ran. I've been running ever since." He finished, and the kitchen was silent. Clara looked at his face, at the anguish, at the raw, unvarnished truth in his eyes. She picked up the bandage. "I believe you," she said. He stared at her. "What?" "I said, I believe you." She began to wrap his ribs. "You didn't murder him. You tried to save someone. You're not a killer." He let out a long, shuddering breath. You don't know." "Yes, I do," she said, her voice dropping. "I know exactly what a killer looks like." He frowned, confused. She finished the knot on the bandage and stepped back. The weight of her own secret, the one she had carried for 5 years, was suddenly suffocating. His honesty demanded hers. "My first husband," she said, her voice flat, her eyes on the dark window. Samuel was my second." Levi watched her, his pain forgotten. "My father," she continued, "was a good man, but a weak one. When I was 17, he was in debt, not to Harrow, to someone else. He arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Jonah. He was older. He owned the trading post. He paid my father's debts." She wrapped her arms around herself. "My father said he would be a good provider. He provided me with a locked door, and bruises I had to hide, and a fear so deep I thought I would drown in it. He beat me." She said it. The words hung in the air, ugly and real. He liked it. He liked that I was afraid. I was his property, same as his horse." She was trembling. "One day, he was sick, a stomach ailment. I was supposed to be brewing him his tea, his remedy." She looked at Levi. I knew about plants. My mother taught me which ones heal and which ones don't." Levi's eyes widened, but he said nothing. "He died," she whispered. "It was mysterious, a wasting sickness. It took 2 weeks. I sat by his bed. I held his hand, and every day I put the poison in his tea. Slowly, just a little. I watched him get weaker. I watched him die. And when he was gone, I was free." She was crying now, the same silent, ugly tears he had shed in her bed. I've never told anyone. Not Samuel, not my father, no one. I'm the killer, Levi. I'm the one who murdered someone. And I did it slowly. And I am not sorry he's dead." The confession ripped out of her, leaving her raw, exposed. They stared at each other. Two survivors, two liars, two people who had taken a life. The air between them was electric. It was a painful, beautiful, terrible release. All the masks were gone. There was nothing left but the truth, sitting between them on the kitchen table. He stood up, his wound forgotten. He crossed the small space between them. He did not look at her with judgment. He did not look at her with pity. He just looked at her. He reached out and put his hand on her cheek. His thumb stroked the damp skin. "Clara," he whispered. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of recognition. It was a drowning man finding the only other person in the ocean. She let him. Her hands came up to grip his arms. She kissed him back, and the world fell away. All the years of drought, the dust, the loneliness, the fear of Harrow, the grief for Samuel, the guilt for Jonah, it all erupted. The kiss deepened, turning into a trembling, desperate hunger. It was an eruption of loneliness, a collision of two people who had been starving for a single, honest touch. He was the one who broke it. He pulled back, his breath ragged, his forehead pressing against hers. He looked into her eyes, and she saw a deep, profound sadness. "I don't want to take anything from you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He thought he was just one more man taking, like Harrow, like Jonah, a fugitive, a burden, a man with nothing. Clara looked at him, at this broken, hunted man who had seen the very worst of her and had not run. He was not taking. He was the only person who had ever truly seen her. She did not say a word. She pulled him closer, her hands sliding from his arms, up his neck, and into his hair. She pulled his mouth back to hers. This time, there was no hesitation. He lifted her, his arms strong despite his wound, and carried her the few feet into her bedroom. He did not lay her on the bed. He just pressed her against the wall, his mouth devouring hers. Their love-making was not soft. It was slow, aching, and desperate. It was a fight against the world, a staking of a claim. It was the frantic, urgent need of two people who had nothing left to lose and one night to prove they were still alive. It was full of sorrow for the lives they had lost. It was full of a fiery, forbidden passion. And in the very center of the darkness, as they clung to each other, there was a tiny, fragile, impossible sliver of hope. The first light of dawn was a pale, gray wash against the bedroom window, turning the room the color of ash. Clara woke slowly, her body warm for the first time she could remember. She was not on the floor, not in a chair. She was in her own bed, and she was not alone. She turned her head. Levi was asleep, his face turned toward her. In sleep, the harsh lines of pain and exhaustion were smoothed away. He looked younger, almost peaceful. His breathing was deep and even. His skin, where the moonlight had made him seem spectral, was now solid and warm in the morning light. He was real. Last night had been real. Her hand moved, seemingly of its own accord. She laid her palm flat against his chest. Over the clean bandage she had wrapped there, she felt the steady, slow beat of his heart under her hand, a solid, living rhythm. A feeling washed over her, so new and so profound it nearly made her weep. It was safety. For years, her life had been a fortress, and she had been its only terrified guard. She had slept with a gun, her ears straining for the sound of raiders, or coyotes, or the heavy, dreaded step of a man who owned her. Even with Samuel, a good and simple man, she had felt a duty, a partnership, but never this feeling of a shared, quiet breath. Levi's heart beat under her hand, and she felt, for one impossible moment, that the world could not get to her. His eyes opened. They were gray, clear, and instantly alert. He did not startle. He just looked at her hand on his chest. A long, silent moment passed. He saw the tracks of her tears from the night before, the new softness in her eyes. "Clara," he said. His voice was rough with sleep. "You're warm," she whispered, a foolish, simple thing to say. "So are you." He covered her hand with his own. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was gentle. The reality of the morning, of Harrow, of the bounty came flooding back in, but the warmth held it at bay. "We have to go," he said, his voice hardening with the thought. "They know you lied. Harrow's son, he'll be back. He'll use any excuse to tear this place apart, and when he finds me—" "He won't just find you," Clara said, pulling her hand back, the safety evaporating. "He'll find us. He'll say I'm an accomplice. He'll take the ranch. He'll take her." They both knew it. "I know a path," Levi said, sitting up slowly. He winced, his hand going to his wounded side, but the fire from the night before was in his eyes. "A high trail, through the Animas. It's hard, but it's not watched, not like the main roads. It'll get us to the border." "The border?" "Sonora," he said. The word sounded foreign, mythical. It's just land, like this, but it's not this land, it's not this law. We could get new names. I can work. I'm strong. When I'm not, well," he gestured to his side. "We could start fresh, be new people." Start fresh. The idea was so large, so full of a blinding, terrifying light, that Clara could not look at it directly. To just walk away from the dust, the debt, the ravine, the graves. She thought of her father, coughing in the next room. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "We'll go." Levi's face flooded with a relief so intense it was almost pain. He had asked the impossible, and she had said yes. "But," she continued, and his face tightened again, "my father, he comes with us." Levi's expression did not fall, but a shadow passed over it. He looked away, toward the door, as if he could hear Elias's shallow breathing. "Clara," he said gently, turning back to her. "He's sick, very sick. The trail I'm talking about, it's not a wagon road. It's hard, on foot. A healthy man would struggle." "He's my father," she said. It was not an argument. It was a fact, as solid as the ground. "It will slow us down," Levi said, his voice strained. He was not being cruel, he was being honest. "Clara, there are men, bounty hunters, Harrow's men who will be looking for us. If they're on horseback, we need to be fast. A sick man. He'll be a danger. To all of us. To himself. I am not leaving him here to die," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I am not leaving him for Harrow to find, to throw out on the road. He is my blood. I will not leave him." She was unmoving, a rock. She would break before she bent on this. Levi looked at her, at this woman who had poisoned a man, who had lied to an armed posse, who had taken him in and shown him a secret wound as deep as his own. He saw the iron in her. It was the same iron that had kept her alive. He had asked her to run with him. He had not. He realized, understood what that meant. She was not a woman who cut her losses. She was a woman who held on. He nodded, once. "All right," he said. "He comes. We all go, or none of us go." He had sealed his fate to hers. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "All right, Clara." The next few hours were a quiet, desperate flurry. They could not wait for nightfall. Harrow could return at any moment. "We have to make this look right," Levi said, his mind sharp, practical. "We can't just vanish. Not yet. We have to make it look like you're just moving him." "Moving him where?" "To town, to a doctor. It's the only story that makes sense. It gives us a head start. By the time they realize you never made it to town, We'll be in the foothills." It was a slim chance, but it was the only one they had. While Levi, moving stiffly, his face tight with pain, secured the mule to the small utility wagon, Clara went inside. She woke her father. "Pa," she said gently, brushing the thin, white hair from his eyes. "Pa, we have to go." Elias's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, distant. "Storm. Coming." "Yes, Pa, a bad one. We have to go to town, to the doctor." "No doctor," he whispered, tired. "I know, Pa, but we have to go." Her voice broke, just for a second. She was lying to him. She was taking him from his home, from the place where he had built a life and where he wanted to die. She and Levi worked together. They loaded the wagon with a speed born of terror, not with furniture, not with memories, only with survival. Water skins, as many as she had, sacks of cornmeal, a side of cured bacon, all the laudanum, her father's blankets, her own pistol, and the rifle Samuel had left behind, which she had not touched in 2 years. Levi found an old box of shells, half full. They made a bed for Elias in the wagon, a nest of blankets and feed sacks to cushion him from the jolt of the hard-baked trail. When it was time, Levi lifted the old man. Elias was a skeleton, lighter than a sack of grain. As Levi settled him into the wagon, the old man's eyes opened. They were surprisingly clear. He looked at Levi. He looked past the beard, past the dirt. He saw the wound, badly hidden by the shirt. He saw the hunted look in his eyes, the same look he'd seen in men coming back from the war. Elias's gaze shifted to his daughter. He saw her, really saw her, standing beside this fugitive, a pistol on her hip, her face set in a new, hard line of resolve. Elias's cracked lips parted. He turned his head back to Levi. "A man on the run," he murmured, his voice a dry rasp. "Usually has a reason." Levi froze. He looked at the dying man. There was no judgment in Elias's eyes, only a weary, profound understanding. It was a blessing, an absolution. Levi nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He pulled the blanket up to the old man's chin. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. Levi untied the mule. He looked back at the small adobe house, the empty corral, the vast, dry ravine at its back. He was leaving one prison for another. He climbed up beside Clara. He took the reins. He did not look back again. They fled at night, having hidden in a shallow arroyo all day. The sun had been a torment, but to travel by day was to invite death. Now, under a vast, cold sky glittering with a million indifferent stars, they moved. The desert stretched ahead, a sea of shadows, thorns, and canyons. The only sound was the creak of the wagon wheels, the click of the mule's hooves, and Elias's shallow breathing from the back. Clara and Levi did not speak. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their bodies a small point of warmth in the immense, cold dark. The land was not empty. It was full of unseen things. The snap of a twig, the low call of a night bird, the rustle of a snake in the brush. Every sound made Clara's heart jump. Levi's eyes, however, were on the horizon, on the dark line of foothills that promised the way to the mountains. He was a man who knew how to live in the shadows. He navigated by the stars, keeping them to the south, his instincts as sharp as a coyote's. For hours, they moved. The progress was agonizingly slow. The mule, old Benjamin, was tough, but the wagon was heavy, and the terrain was brutal. They were crossing a dried riverbed, a wide, sandy scar in the earth, when it happened. The moon was high, bathing the white sand in a ghostly light. The front left wheel of the wagon dipped into a patch of soft sand, then struck a half-buried boulder with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot in the silence. The wagon lurched, throwing Clara against Levi. The mule brayed in terror. Levi pulled back on the reins. "Whoa, whoa, Ben!" He jumped down. Clara was beside him in an instant, the lantern in her hand. The wheel was split, a long, jagged break in the wood. It was not just stuck, it was broken, utterly. "No," Clara whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "No, no!" Levi kicked the wheel, a single violent act of frustration. "Damn it!" He ran his hands through his hair. They were stranded, in the middle of nowhere, in the open. From the wagon, Elias coughed, a thin, rattling sound. "We go on foot," Levi said, his voice flat. He was already unhitching the mule. "We can't," Clara cried, the panic rising. "My father, he can't walk." "He'll ride the mule," Levi said, his movements fast, efficient. "We'll take what we can carry. The water, the food, the rifle. We have to go, now." He was throwing packs together, blankets rolled and tied with rope, water skins slung over his shoulders. He helped Clara load her own back. He was a machine, his despair channeled into movement. He lifted Elias from the wagon bed. The old man was delirious, murmuring his wife's name. Levi strapped him onto the mule's back, tying him gently but firmly so he would not fall. They left the wagon, a monument to their failed hope. They set off on foot, Levi leading the mule, Clara walking beside it, her hand on her father's leg. They walked for an hour. 2. The sun was a promise of burning heat in the east, a sliver of pale orange. They had to find cover. Levi stopped. He held up a hand. "What?" Clara whispered. "Listen." She heard it. Hoofbeats. Not one mule, many horses, coming from the direction they had just fled. "Harrow," she breathed. "Or hunters," Levi said, his face grim. He pulled her and the mule behind a rise, into a thicket of mesquite and cholla. They waited. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then, on the ridgeline, silhouetted against the rising sun, they appeared. 5 riders, black shapes against the orange sky. They were not Harrow's men. They were hard-looking men, rifles across their saddles, their hats pulled low. They were looking at the ground. Trackers. "Bounty hunters," Levi whispered. "They found the wagon." Clara's blood turned to ice. They were trapped. The men were 1,000 yards away, but they were already doomed. "Give me the rifle," Levi said. "What? No, Levi, you can't. There are 5 of them." "I'm not going to fight them," he said, taking the rifle from her unresisting hands. He checked the load. "I'm going to lead them away." "What? No!" Clara grabbed his arm. "No, you can't. They'll kill you." "They'll kill us all if I don't," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "You," he said, his voice urgent. "You take your father. You follow this ravine north. See that shadow? That V in the hills? Head for that. Don't stop. Don't look back. Hide. I'll find you." "Levi, please," she begged, tears starting in her eyes. "Don't go. Don't leave me." He grabbed her, his hand tangling in her hair, and kissed her. It was a hard, desperate kiss, full of fear and a promise he could not keep. "You are stronger than you think." "Clara," he whispered against her lips. "Now go, run!" Before she could scream, before she could argue, he was gone. He ran low and fast, moving east, away from the ravine. He climbed a small rise, in full view of the hunters. He raised the rifle and fired. Once, into the air. The shot echoed, sharp and clear. The 5 riders stopped. They had seen him. Levi turned and ran, a lone man, a perfect target. "No!" Clara screamed, a raw, tearing sound. But she did not run after him. She grabbed the mule's lead. "Run!" Levi had commanded. Sobbing, she pulled the mule and her father into the deepening shadows of the ravine, heading north. She walked for hours. The ravine grew deeper, the walls higher. The sun was a furnace overhead, but down here, there was shade. She did not stop. She just walked, her mind a numb, roaring void. He was gone. He had sacrificed himself. He had given her the one thing he had, a head start. The hours dragged on. 1 hour. 2. Her father had not moved. His breathing so shallow she had to stop and check if he was still alive. She found a small seep, a patch of damp earth, and let the mule drink. She drank, the water hot and tasting of minerals. She was alone, truly alone. This time, she sat, her back against the hot rock, and for the first time since her mother died, she gave into a despair so complete it felt like death. Then she heard a sound, a skittering of rocks. She grabbed her pistol, her hands shaking. "Who's there?" A figure stumbled around the bend in the ravine. He was covered in dust, his shirt torn, his face streaked with sweat. He was bruised, breathing in huge, gasping sobs, and he was out of breath. It was Levi. She dropped the pistol. "Levi!" She ran to him. He fell into her arms, his weight nearly taking them both down. He was real. He was alive. "How?" she cried, holding his face, touching his chest, his arms, as if to be sure he was not a ghost. "Ran," he gasped, leaning on her. "Ran, in circles, in the canyons. They're not from here. They don't know the land. I do. Lost them, in the rocks. Had to double back, miles." He had done it. He had led 5 armed men on a chase through the desert, on foot, and he had won. She held him, her arms wrapped around his neck, his around her waist. They just stood there, holding each other like they might disappear. He was bruised, exhausted, but he was alive. He was here. They could not rest, as if the desert itself was trying to kill them. The sky, which had been a clear, hateful blue, began to change. Dark, purplish clouds gathered on the horizon, building with an unnatural speed. The air grew thick, heavy, and still. A low rumble of thunder. "Rain," Levi said, his voice full of a new dread. "We have to find high ground. This ravine, it's a flood trap." The storm broke with the violence of a gunshot. The sky opened. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that turned the dry ravine bed into a churning, muddy river within minutes. They scrambled up the rocks, Levi pulling the mule, Clara half carrying her father, who had been jolted into a state of terrified, coughing consciousness. The water rose, brown and angry, roaring where they had stood moments before. They were trapped on a narrow ledge, soaked to the skin, the wind howling around them. "This way!" Levi roared over the storm. He pointed. Further up the canyon wall, half hidden by overgrown brush, was a dark opening, an archway. They half climbed, half crawled, dragging the mule, and tumbled into the shelter. It was an old, abandoned mission. The roof was gone in places, but one long chapel hall was still intact. It smelled of dust, bat guano, and the sudden, sweet smell of the desert rain. It was shelter. Levi tied the mule, and they carried Elias to the driest corner, laying him on their last dry blanket. The old man was shivering, his lips blue. "Fire," Levi said, his teeth chattering. "We need a fire, or he'll die." He went out into the storm, returning moments later with an armload of dry brush and wood he had found in a sheltered alcove. He used his last matches, his hands shaking so badly Clara had to shield the tiny flame with her own body. It caught a small, sputtering fire that grew into a blessed, dancing light. They huddled around it, the 3 of them, a strange, broken family in a ruined church. Clara was soaked, her clothes plastered to her skin, the cold settling into her bones. She was shivering violently. You have to get out of those clothes," Levi said, not looking at her. He was staring into the fire. "You'll freeze." He was right. She looked down. Her thin cotton shirt was useless. She was already numb. Slowly, her fingers stiff, She began to unbutton her shirt. Levi turned his back, a gesture of respect so profound, so deliberate, in the midst of this chaos, that it touched her more than a kiss. She stripped down to her thin chemise, her skin pale in the firelight. She hung her wet clothes on a rock near the fire. She was cold, so cold. She looked at Levi's back. He was a wall, solid and respectful, giving her privacy where there was none. He was shivering too, his own wet shirt clinging to his back, the muscles tight. She did not go for her blanket. She went to him. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her half-naked body against his back. He went rigid, his breath catching. "Clara," he whispered. "You're cold, too," she murmured, pressing her face between his shoulder blades. He turned slowly in her arms. He looked at her bare shoulders, at the firelight in her eyes. He saw not a woman offering her body, but a woman seeking comfort, a woman who was as terrified as he was. He kissed her. This time, it was not the desperate eruption of their first night. It was not the fearful goodbye of the morning. It was a kiss of purpose, a kiss that said, "We are alive," a kiss that said, "I am here." She kissed him back, needing his warmth, his strength. It was an urgent, consuming need. The storm roared outside, a counterpoint to the storm inside them. Their lovemaking was a defiance of the rain, of the hunters, of the dying man in the corner. It was an affirmation of life, desperate and consuming, in the heart of a ruin. That night, the storm passed. The fire burned low. Levi and Clara lay tangled together under a shared blanket, finally asleep. A voice, thin as a reed, broke the silence. "Anna." Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her. Her father was awake. His eyes were open, and they were perfectly clear. He was looking at her. "Anna," he said again, mistaking her for her mother. "It's Clara, Pa," she whispered, crawling to his side. "I'm here." "Clara," he breathed. He smiled, a faint, sweet smile. "You look just like her." He reached out a frail hand, and she took it. It was cold. "You're a good daughter," he whispered. You've been a good daughter, but you've been just surviving." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "Pa, don't talk. Rest." "No," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "You listen. I survived. Your mother. She lived. You understand? Don't just survive. Clara, you live." His eyes drifted past her, to the shadows where Levi lay watching, his face unreadable in the dim light. Elias's gaze returned to his daughter. He squeezed her hand. "Live," he whispered again. His eyes closed, and his breathing, which had been so labored, softened into a shallow, peaceful rhythm. Clara sat beside him, holding his hand, as the embers of the fire died, one by one. Clara held her father's hand as the night deepened in the ruined mission. The fire had died to a handful of red coals, casting a faint, warm glow on the stone floor. Levi was asleep, or pretending to be, a few feet away, giving them a privacy that was both respectful and heartbreaking. Elias's breathing, which had been a shallow rasp, grew softer and softer. He had not spoken again after his plea for her to live. He had simply held her hand, his grip astonishingly frail, a bird's claw. Now, in the absolute cold stillness before dawn, Clara felt the last of the warmth leave his fingers. There was no rattle, no final gasp. He just stopped. He was a presence, and then he was an absence. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of a man sleeping. It was the silence of the desert, of the stones, of the empty sky. She did not move. She did not weep. She just sat, holding the hand of the cold body, and watched as the gray light of dawn began to creep into the mission, touching the broken altar, the damp walls, and the face of her dead father. Levi stirred. He sat up, his movement stiff from the cold and his wound. He saw her, silhouetted against the pale light, her back rigid. He saw her posture, the stillness. He knew. He did not speak. He stood up, his body aching, and went to her. He did not touch her. He just stood beside her, a silent, solid presence, and looked down at the peaceful, waxy face of the old man. After a long time, Clara's voice, a dry whisper, broke the stillness. "He's gone." "I know," Levi said. "He's free," she said, more to herself than to him. "He's with my mother now." She gently placed her father's hand on his chest, folding it over the other. Then she stood up, her joints cracking. "We have to bury him." The earth outside the mission was hard, a mix of baked clay and stone. The storm had softened the top layer, but it was still a cruel task. Levi had no shovel. He used a flat piece of rock in his own hands, his wound pulling, his breath coming in sharp hisses. Clara worked beside him, using her own knife to cut at the stubborn roots of desert brush, her hands raw and bleeding. It took them 2 hours. They dug a shallow grave, as deep as their strength would allow, in a small patch of earth that overlooked the canyon. It was the best they could. Clara went back inside. She wrapped her father's body in the blanket he had died on. It was their last clean blanket. She did not hesitate. Levi helped her carry the light, shrouded burden. They laid him in the earth. Clara stood over the grave, her face a mask of stone. Levi began to push the dirt back in, the sound of the rocks hitting the blanket a terrible, final punctuation. When it was done, when a small, rough mound of earth was all that was left, Clara's control broke. It was not a soft weeping. It was a sob that tore itself from her chest, a raw, animal sound of such profound loss that it made the desert air tremble. She sank to her knees, her hands clawing at the dirt, the word "Pa," a broken cry. This was the end of everything, the end of the ranch, the end of her duty, the end of the girl who had done nothing but tend to the dying. She was alone, utterly. Levi did not try to quiet her. He did not offer useless words. He simply knelt beside her in the mud, wrapped his arms around her shaking body, and held her. He held her as she sobbed, as she beat her fists against the hard ground, as the grief she had held back for years, for Samuel, for her mother, for the life she had lost, finally poured out of her. He just held her, his own face buried in her hair, his own eyes squeezed shut, anchoring her to the world. She wept until there was nothing left but a dry, shuddering emptiness. She slumped against him, her energy gone, her body limp. The world was gray, silent. Her father's last word echoed, "Live." It sounded like a mockery. How could she live when she could barely breathe? They left the mission. They had to. The hunters were still out there. They continued on foot, Levi leading the mule, old Benjamin, who now carried all their meager supplies. But Clara was hollowed out. Her feet moved, but she was not there. The desert was a blur of gray rock and brown thorns. The sun beat down, but she did not feel the heat. She was walking in a void. That afternoon, she stopped in the middle of a vast, flat, sun-blasted plain. She just sat down. "Clara?" Levi stopped, turning back. The mule tugged at the lead, impatient. She said nothing. She just stared at her hands, still crusted with the dirt of her father's grave. What was the point? Running, hiding. For what? To be hunted in a new place? To watch Levi be captured? To die in another patch of dirt? Alone? "Clara, we have to go," Levi urged, his voice gentle but firm. "We can't stay here. We're exposed." "Go where?" she whispered, her voice dead. "It doesn't matter. Levi, you saw them. 5 of them. They'll find us. Or Harrow will, or someone else will. It never stops. I'm just so tired. I can't." I can't do it anymore." She was giving up. The iron that had held her together had finally shattered. Levi looked at her, at the absolute despair in her face. He saw the void she was staring into. He knew that void. He had lived in it for years. He did not pull her. He did not yell. He walked back, unslung his water skin, and sat down in the dust across from her, just out of arm's reach. "All right," he said. She looked up, confused. "What?" "All right. We'll rest here." He said it calmly. "We'll rest, and then we'll decide. But I want to tell you something first." He looked down at his own hands, turning them over. "For 5 years," he said, his voice low. "I haven't been a man. I've been a thing, a ghost, just running. Every person I met was a threat. Every sunrise was a danger. I slept with one eye open. I ate like an animal. I was dead. Clara, I was just too stubborn to lie down." He looked up, and his gray eyes were so clear, so honest, they hurt to look at. "I fell in that quarry, but I died in that prison. The man who came out, he wasn't alive." He leaned forward, just an inch. "And then I fell in your barn, and you pointed a gun at my chest, and your hand was shaking, but your eyes weren't, and I thought, she's as scared as I am, and as trapped." A small, rough smile touched his lips. "And then you gave me hell. You lied to those men. You patched my wound. You told me a secret that could have gotten you hanged. You." His voice grew thick. "You made me feel something, Clara. After all I've been through, after all the dirt and the blood, you're the first thing that's made me feel alive again. The only thing." He held her gaze. "I'm not running from them anymore. I'm running toward something. With you. If you give up, if you sit here and let the desert take you, then it takes me too, and all this was for nothing." He finished. The silence was absolute, broken only by the dry wind. Clara looked at him. He was not a hero. He was a wounded, broken man, just like her. But he was alive. He was sitting in front of her, offering her not a future, not a promise of safety, but a reason. Live. She remembered her father's hand. She remembered Levi's body, warm, in her bed. Slowly, her expression hardening, she held out her hand. Levi did not smile. He just took her hand, his grip firm, and pulled her to her feet. They did not speak of it again. They walked. They traveled by moonlight and hid during the brutal, baking days. Hunger and thirst became their constant companions. The desert was a relentless enemy, tearing at their clothes, their boots, their resolve. They shared the last of the cornmeal, dry. They rationed water by the sip. Old Benjamin grew thin, his ribs stark. Clara's grief hardened. It did not disappear, but it transformed. It became a cold, hard stone in her gut, a new kind of iron. Her father had died for her to live. She would not waste the cost. After 3 more days, when the water was gone and their lips were cracked and bleeding, they saw it. Not a town, just a smudge of smoke in a valley cleft. "Agua Prieta," Levi whispered, his voice a croak. It's not a town, it's a place, a border, no law, just people." He pulled her behind a rock. "I know someone here, an old friend, a blacksmith. He owes me, from before. Stay here with the mule. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone." "Levi, you can't." "I have to. It's our only chance." He touched her face, his fingers trembling with exhaustion. And then he was gone, a ghost in the twilight, moving toward the smoke. Clara waited. An hour, 2. Every shadow was a hunter. Every distant shout was a threat. She held the pistol, her last line of defense. He came back just before dawn. He was not alone. He was with a short, broad-shouldered man in a leather apron, who was leading 2 horses, real horses, a strong bay mare and a rangy roan. "This is Jedediah." Levi said, "Jed, this is Clara." The blacksmith. Jed had a face like a burnt boot, all seams and soot. He just grunted, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked at Clara, at her gun, at her hard, tired face. He nodded once. "He's giving us the horses," Levi said, his voice full of a relief so deep it was almost pain. "And this—" He held up 2 folded pieces of paper. "Forged papers. He says they'll pass. John and Sarah Miller. From Ohio." "Ohio," Clara repeated. The word was alien. "They cost him," Jed said, his voice a low gravel. "Cost him a lot. The man who makes these, he don't like to be rushed." "I'll pay you back, Jed," Levi said. "You already did." Jed snapped. He looked at Levi's side. "You saved my neck from that chain gang. I call us even, but you can't stay here. This place, it's got ears. And the men who are looking for you, they're not law, they're—" "I know," Levi said. "You can stay in my loft till morning." Jed offered, "Just till the sun is up. It's the safest place. There's food, water. Then you ride, and you don't stop till you hit the ocean." The loft was above the smithy, reached by a rickety ladder. It was hot, and it smelled of hay, coal smoke, and metal. But it was safe. There was a bucket of fresh water, a loaf of dark bread, and a wedge of cheese. It was a feast. They sat on a pile of hay, side by side, and ate in silence. The taste of real food so good it made Clara's eyes water. Jed had left them. The smithy below was dark. They were alone. They were safe, for a few hours. They had papers, they had horses, they had a future, a tiny, fragile chance. Levi finished his bread and looked at Clara. She was watching him, her face soft in the lantern light. "Clara," he said, his voice low. He looked away, at the papers in his hand. "John and Sarah Miller." He tossed them onto the hay. You don't have to be Sarah Miller. Not if you don't want to." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You don't owe me anything for any of this. I got you into this. Harrow, the hunters. It's because of me. Your father—" His voice broke. "Your father's dead because I brought this to your door." "No," Clara said, her voice fierce. "My father died because he was sick. He died because it was his time. He told me to live. Levi, he didn't tell me to run from you." "But I'm a dead man," Levi said, finally looking at her. The anguish was back, the hunted look. "I'm a dead man. Clara, this is just—" A pause. "They will never stop looking. You have a horse. You have papers. You could go, alone. You could be Sarah Miller. You could start over. For real. Without me." He was offering her an escape. From him. "If you want to go alone," he whispered, his heart breaking in his eyes. "I'll disappear. I'll lead them off. I won't let them follow you. I promise." She looked at him, at this man who had run from the law, who had faced down bounty hunters, who was now offering to sacrifice himself, again, just so she could be free. She did not say a word. She moved across the hay. She knelt in front of him. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of their first night. It was not the urgent, comforting kiss in the mission. It was slow, deliberate, tender. She kissed him softly, then pulled back, just enough to look him in the eyes. Her hands came up to frame his face, her thumbs stroking his rough beard. "You are not just something I survived with, Levi Callahan," she whispered, her voice steady. "You are someone I want." His breath hitched. A single tear escaped his eye, and she wiped it away. "You are not a ghost," she said, "and you are not dead. You're here, with me." She kissed him again, and this time he kissed her back. Their lovemaking was as quiet as the night. It was slow and soft and tender. It was a discovery. It was two people, as equals, finally choosing each other. Not out of need, not out of desperation, but out of want. It was a promise made in the silence of a hayloft, a promise that they were, at last, John and Sarah Miller, or maybe, for the first time, just Levi and Clara. They were free. The betrayal came at dawn. They were asleep, tangled in each other and a horse blanket, the first truly peaceful sleep either had known. A crash from below, the sound of wood splintering.
Levi! Levi in the loft! He's here!
It was Jedediah's voice, a terrified, guilty shout. Levi was on his feet in a second, his eyes wide with a terror that was not for himself. "Clara, hide, under the hay. Don't move."
"No."
"Do it," he roared, and the command was so absolute, so full of panic, that she obeyed. She scrambled into the darkest corner and buried herself under the loose hay, her pistol in her hand. She heard them. Heavy boots on the ladder. Not 5 men, more. The loft door was thrown open. Levi was standing in the middle of the room, shirtless, his hands raised. "I'm here," he said. "It's just me. Leave him alone. He's got nothing to do with it."
"Shut up, Callahan!"
A voice snarled. It was a new voice, cold and flat. Clara heard a sound, a wet, heavy thud, and Levi's grunt of pain. They had hit him. Through a tiny gap in the hay, she saw them. 3 men. The leader was tall, wearing a long, dusty coat. He held a pistol. He was the one who had hit Levi, who was now on his knees, blood dripping from his mouth. "Chained," the leader said. They dragged Levi up, his wound tearing, his face pale. They clapped heavy iron chains on his wrists. They were not lawmen. They were bounty hunters. "Told you he'd be here," Jed said from the doorway, his voice shaking. He was holding a small pouch. "Money." You betrayed us," Levi choked out, looking at his friend. They offered me 500, Jed whispered, his eyes full of shame. My wife is sick."
"Get him on a horse!"
the leader snapped. Ignoring the blacksmith, he shoved Levi toward the ladder. Levi was beaten, chained, captured. Clara lay in the hay, her body rigid, her heart a cold stone. She did not breathe. She did not move. She just watched. They dragged him down. She heard the horses, the jangling of bridles. She waited. 1 minute, 2. Then she moved. She pushed the hay aside. Her face was a mask, her eyes burning. Her grief, her despair. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, pure, diamond-hard rage. She grabbed the rifle, her father's rifle. She checked the load. She slung the water skin and the ammunition over her shoulder. She went to the window. They were riding out. Slow. They were not worried. They had their prize. Levi was slumped over a horse, chained. She ran down the ladder. Jed was still there, sitting at his forge, his head in his hands, weeping. He looked up as she landed on the smithy floor, the rifle in her hand. He started. She did not speak. She walked past him. She went to the horses he had given them. Her mare, the bay. She bridled it, her hands fast, efficient. She mounted. She rode out of the smithy into the rising sun. She rode after them. She found them 2 hours later. They had stopped in a grove of cottonwoods by a shallow creek. They were relaxed. 1 man was watering the horses. 1 was building a small fire. The leader was with Levi. He had unbound him from the horse. He had tied him to a tree, his hands bound behind the trunk. Clara watched from a ridge, 500 yards away. The leader stood in front of Levi. He pulled his pistol. He smoked a cigarette, talking to Levi, his voice too low to hear. Then, he pressed the pistol to Levi's temple. He was enjoying it. He was a man like Jonah, A man like Harrow. A man who liked to see fear. Clara's hand did not shake. She dismounted. She lay on the hot rock of the ridge. She rested her father's rifle on a boulder. She had shot at rabbits. She had shot at cans. She had never shot at a man. She lined up the sights, not on the leader. He was too close to Levi. She lined up the sights on the man building the fire. He was laughing. She thought of her father. Live. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's kick slammed into her shoulder. The shot was a deafening crack in the morning air. Down in the grove, the man by the fire did not laugh. He just folded. He fell forward into the flames. A standoff. The leader spun, firing his pistol wildly toward the ridge. The other man scrambled for his rifle. Levi. Levi was screaming, not in pain, in terror.
Clara, no! Run! Run! Damn you! Run!
Clara chambered another round. She did not move. She did not run. The world was a roar. Levi's voice screaming her name. The crack of a rifle, not her own. The acrid smell of gunpowder, hot and sharp in her throat. Then, a blow. A solid, shattering impact against the side of her head, coming from a direction she had not been watching. It was not a bullet. It was a solid, heavy thing, an iron rifle butt, swung with brutal intent. The world did not go black. It exploded in a flash of white, agonizing light. And then it was gone. She woke to a smell. It was the smell of stale sweat, dried urine, and something sour she could not name. Her head was a ball of fire, a deep, pounding ache that radiated from her temple down to her jaw. She was lying on a surface that was hard, unyielding, and filthy. She opened her eyes. Bars. She was not on the ridge. She was in a room, a cage, a small, dark space with a packed dirt floor and stone walls. A single, high window, barred like her door, let in a shaft of unforgiving sunlight, illuminating a billion motes of dust. A jail cell. She's awake. The voice was not Levi's. It was a dull, flat sound from outside the cell. Levi, she croaked. Her throat was raw. Her hand went to her head, and she felt the dried, matted blood in her hair. Clara? His voice. It was a groan, a sound of such complete, broken despair that it was worse than the blow to her head. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the wave of dizziness that made the room spin. She gripped the bars.
Levi, where are you?
I'm here. He was in the cell next to hers. She could not see him. There was a solid wall between them. She could only hear his voice, muffled, coming from the next cage. Are you hurt? She asked, her voice shaking. A bitter, dry laugh. They took their time. Harlan, the leader, he was angry. About his man. She understood. They had beaten him. Clara, he whispered, his voice desperate. Your head, I saw him hit you. I'm all right, she said, though the lie tasted like dust. Where are we? What is this place? A town, he said. Doesn't have a name, I know. Just a jail. Harlan brought us in, to the local deputy, to make it official. Official? The man who had spoken before now appeared. He was not a bounty hunter. He was older, paunched, with a tin star pinned to a dirty vest. He had a weary, bloodshot gaze. A deputy. He jangled a set of keys. Harlan's gone to the telegraph office. That's what. He's collecting his $500 for you, Callahan, and he's letting the Marshal's service know where to find their murderer. Clara's blood ran cold. What does that mean? The deputy sighed, as if the whole thing was a tedious chore. It means a real marshal, a federal one, is on his way. He'll be on the train from Tucson. Gets here tomorrow, maybe the day after. He looked at Levi's wall. And then they're taking you back east. Son, back to where they try you. And hang me, Levi finished, his voice dead. That's what they do for murdering a marshal? The deputy agreed, turning to walk away. Wait, Clara said. What about me? I didn't... You? The deputy looked back at her, his eyes full of a weary disgust. You, Missy, are an accomplice and a killer. You shot Silas Blevins off his horse from 500 yards. Harlan's other man, Tucker, saw the whole thing. Said he never saw a woman shoot like that. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the floor, just outside her cell. They don't know what to do with you yet, but they'll think of something. He left. They were alone. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the buzz of flies against the hot window. Clara, Levi finally said, his voice raw. I'm sorry, I swear. I am so sorry. I dragged you into this, your father, your home. And now this. You should have shot me in that barn. You should have taken the money. Be quiet, Levi, she said, her voice low, but fierce. She pressed her forehead against the cold bars. You're not dead yet, and I'm not done. Her words were brave, but the next day, her resolve was tested. The deputy, Stokes, was not a cruel man, but he was a man of the law. He let her out, once in the morning, once in the evening, to use the necessary house out back. It was a walk of shame. The jail was on the main street. The whole town, all 24 buildings of it, came to watch. She walked, her hands cuffed in front of her, her head pounding, her hair still matted. The deputy held her arm. The townspeople whispered. She heard it all. Men in the saloon, leaning on the porch rails, stopped talking. Their eyes were not kind. They were curious and cold. That's her, the one who was with Callahan. They say she's a killer. Shot Blevins right out of his saddle. Don't look like much. Looks worn out. The women were worse. They gathered in front of the general store, their faces pinched with moral superiority. A woman, helping a fugitive, traveling with him, alone. You know what that means. And fighting like a man. It's unnatural. A young man, brave with whiskey from the saloon, called out, Hey, killer, who's next? You gonna shoot the deputy too? Clara stopped. She turned. She looked at him. Her eyes were not angry. They were not ashamed. They were as cold and hard as the desert at night. She said nothing. She held her head high and kept walking. Her silence, her lack of shame, was more defiant than any curse. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She just endured. And the town, in the face of her quiet, unbroken will, looked away, one by one. That afternoon, a woman came. She was not one of the whisperers. She was older, in her 60s, her face a roadmap of sun and hard times. She wore a clean apron and carried a covered tray. Martha, Deputy Stokes said, his voice softening. Heard you were bringing food. They're still human, ain't they? The woman, Martha said, her voice sharp. Even if you treat 'em like animals. Now let me pass. She came to Clara's cell first. She slid a wooden tray through the bars. It held a bowl of thin stew and a piece of cornbread. Eat, she commanded. Clara looked at the food, her stomach churning. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. I told you to eat. Martha's eyes were sharp, blue, and missed nothing. They took in Clara's matted hair, her bruised face, her unbroken stare. She slid the next tray through the bars to Levi's cell. You, too, she snapped. She returned to Clara, taking her time, pretending to adjust the tray. The deputy was at his desk, reading an old newspaper. Martha leaned in close, her hand, hidden in the folds of her apron, moved. The marshal's train gets in tomorrow, she whispered, her voice fast and low. At noon, Harlan and his man are in the saloon, celebrating. Clara's eyes locked with hers. He's the only law in this town, Martha whispered, nodding toward Stokes. And he's a lazy sleeper. Her hand moved. She pressed something cold, hard, and sharp into Clara's palm, hiding it under the cornbread. A knife, small, a paring knife, but the blade was keen. Clara palmed it, her heart slamming against her ribs. She hid it in the waistband of her torn trousers. She looked at Martha, her eyes asking the question, why? Martha's face softened, just for an instant, a flash of ancient pain. I had a man once, a good man. The law took him. For nothing. A disagreement over a brand. They decided his ending. She straightened up, her face a mask once more. If you love him, she said, her voice flat, don't let the law decide your ending. She picked up an empty tray from the day before and walked out, not looking back. Clara waited. Night fell. The town went quiet. The saloon spilled its last drunk onto the street. And then there was only silence. Inside the jail, the lamp was turned low. Deputy Stokes sat at his desk, his boots up, his chair tipped back, and he began to snore. Clara moved to the bars, the knife in her hand. She was barefoot, silent. The deputy was sleeping, just as Martha had said, a deep rumbling, whiskey-aided sleep. His chair was leaned back against the wall, just 4 feet from her cell. On his belt, on a thick leather thong, hung a heavy ring of iron keys. Clara reached, her fingers strained. She was 6 inches short. She cursed silently. She looked around her cell. Nothing, just her, the dirt, the bars. She looked at Levi's wall. Levi, she whispered. I'm here. He was awake. He had been waiting. The keys. I can't reach them. His belt, Levi whispered back. The thong. Can you cut it? Clara looked. The leather thong was looped through his belt. She could just reach the edge of it. She extended her arm through the bars, the small knife a tiny, inadequate blade. She began to saw. The sound was terrible, a tiny, stretching squeak of leather on leather. Stokes snorted in his sleep. He shifted. Clara froze, her arm aching, her heart in her throat. He settled, the snore resuming. She went back to work, sawing, slicing, one thin fiber at a time. The leather was thick, old, and tough. It took an eternity. Her shoulder burned, her fingers cramped. Then, with a final, soft rip, the leather loop gave way. The heavy ring of keys slid down the thong and fell. Not to the floor, but to the end of the loop, now cut, which she held in her fist. She had them. She pulled the keys, ring and loop, through the bars. Her hands were shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to find the key for her own cell. The lock was heavy, oiled. It made a loud, solid click. Stokes did not move. Clara pushed the door open, the hinges groaning. She froze. The snoring continued. She padded, silent, across the office. She was in the open. She went to Levi's cell. He was at the bars, his eyes wide. Which one? She whispered, holding up the ring. The big iron one, he breathed. She found it, slid it in. Another click. The door swung open. Levi stumbled out. He was bruised, his face swollen, but he was on his feet. He did not pause to hold her. He went straight to the wall where the deputy's rifle and his own gun belt hung. And her rifle. He strapped his pistol on. He checked the load. He handed Clara her rifle. The weight of it was familiar. Solid. A comfort. Ammunition, he whispered, pointing to a box on the deputy's desk. She stuffed her pockets. He grabbed the deputy's rifle, too. Back door, he mouthed. They slipped out into the alley. The night air was cold, free. The moon was a high, thin sliver. We need horses, she whispered. The livery, but not Jed's, the town livery, this way. They moved like ghosts, from shadow to shadow. The town was dead asleep. The livery was dark. They found 2 horses, fast ones, in the stalls. They were saddling them, their hands moving with desperate speed. A dog barked, a single, sharp yip. Then another. A light flickered on in the house across the street. A window opened. "Who's out there? Who's in the livery?"
Go!
Levi hissed. He slapped the rump of Clara's horse. They burst out of the livery, not on the road, but through the back fence, the wood splintering. Behind them, the world erupted. Deputy Stokes, finally awake, fired his pistol into the air. The town bell began to ring, a frantic, clanging alarm. "Prison break! They're out! Prison break!" Lights came on in every window. Men yelled, "Harlan, from the saloon!" Roared, "They're mine! Get horses! They're mine!" Clara and Levi galloped, low over the horses' necks, out of the town. They headed for the only cover they knew, the rocky, dark hills. A final chase. This time, the town followed. The posse was fast, Harlan, Tucker, and half a dozen townsmen, angry and eager. They were riding for blood. The moon was just bright enough to be a curse, silhouetting them against the rocks. Crack, a rifle shot. A bullet pinged off the rock just above Clara's head, sending stone chips stinging her face. "They're gaining!" she screamed. "Keep pushing!" Levi yelled. He led them into a narrow, twisting wash, the canyon walls rising around them. It was a maze. Crack, another shot. This one was not a miss. Levi grunted, a sharp, punched-out sound. He slumped forward in the saddle, his hand grabbing his side. "Levi." "I'm all right," he lied, his voice tight with pain. "It's just a graze. Keep riding." But he was not all right. She could see the dark stain spreading on his shirt, in the exact same place as before. He had been shot again, in his old wound. "Clara, don't stop!" he gasped, but his horse was already slowing. He was falling. Clara reined in, grabbing his bridle. "I won't leave you." She pulled his horse along, her own straining, but the posse was too close. The sound of their horses was a thunder in the wash. In here," Levi panted, his voice weak. He pointed at a dark cleft in the rock, a narrow opening. "It's a canyon, a trap." "No, Levi, it's a dead end." "It's the only place," he choked, reeling. I can't run anymore." She made the choice. She pulled both horses into the cleft. It was a box canyon, a small, sandy floor, sheer rock walls, and no way out. They were trapped. Levi fell from his horse. He did not get up. Clara was off her own, at his side, dragging him to the relative cover of the canyon wall. She ripped open his shirt. It was bad. The wound was torn open, and he was bleeding. A lot. The sand around him was already turning dark. "Levi," she whispered, pressing both hands to the wound. "Levi, stay with me." His skin was cold, clammy. His eyes were half closed. "Clara, it's cold." No, you don't. Stay awake." She held his face, her hands shaking, smearing his cheek with his own blood. Look at me. Levi." His eyes fluttered. He tried to focus. Remember the storm?" she whispered, her voice frantic, a desperate, rambling prayer. "In the barn, you were so muddy, and I was so scared." "Cold," he breathed. "No, remember the loft," she pleaded. "The bread and cheese. You called me Sarah Miller, remember? We were going to be free." "Sarah," his eyes closed. "No, Levi." She knew. He was dying. They were trapped. The posse would find them at dawn. It was over. Her hand, shaking, went to the pistol on her hip, the one he had given back to her, the one that started it all. She pulled it. She pressed it into his cold hand. His fingers were too weak to hold it. "Levi," she whispered, her mind breaking, the terror and the grief making her delirious. "Here, take it. They're coming. I'll stop them. I'll fight." She was crying so hard she could barely speak. If I don't make it," she sobbed, her mind confusing her fate with his, her words a jumbled echo of a promise. If I'm gone, you go on. You have to, you crawl. Promise me, Levi." He looked at the gun, then at her. He saw the absolute breaking terror in her eyes. He refused. He let the gun fall from his weak grasp into the sand. "No. Levi, please, promise me." "No." He used the very last of his strength, his one good arm, to grab her wrist. He pulled her down to him, his voice a raw, agonizing whisper. "Clara, listen. To me." He was dying. She could feel the life bleeding out of him into the cold sand. But his eyes were clear. "If I lose you," he gasped, each word a torment. "I've got nothing left to run toward. Do you understand?" He was weeping now, the tears tracking through the blood and the dust. I'm not running, not without you." She collapsed on top of him, her face buried in his neck. He held her, his arm tightening, a final, desperate embrace. They cried together, a tangled, broken mess of sweat and dust and blood. As the first cold gray light of dawn began to touch the rim of the canyon above them. Dawn broke, not as a promise, but as a judgment. The gray, cold light spilled over the rim of the box canyon, illuminating the scene with a cruel, surgical clarity. It lit the sheer rock walls, the sandy floor, the dark, spreading stain beneath Levi, and the faces of the men at the canyon's mouth. They were on foot. Harlan, the leader, and his man, Tucker, and 3 of the townsmen, their faces grim, their rifles held ready. They had trapped their quarry. Levi was a heap at the base of the wall, his breathing a shallow, wet sound, his eyes closed. He was tangled in Clara's arms, and for a terrible, cold moment, she thought he was already gone, but his fingers, slick with his own blood, were still gripped in her shirt. "It's over, Callahan!" Harlan's voice echoed in the small space. It was flat, cold. "Send the woman out. We only want you." Clara moved. She did not rise from her knees. She shifted, her body aching, her head pounding from the blow she had taken. She moved to shield Levi, her back to him, facing the men. "I said, send her out!" Harlan yelled, taking a step forward. Clara did not look for her rifle. It was 10 feet away. By her horse, it was too far. Her hand, trembling with a cold, pure rage, went to the pistol on her hip. She drew it. It was the gun from the first night, the heavy, cold piece of metal he had pressed to his own chest, offering her a choice. She stood up, slowly. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees. She was a specter, her hair matted with blood, her dress torn, her face a mask of dust and grief. She held the pistol down at her side, her thumb not on the hammer, but her grip sure. She stood in front of Levi's body, a one-woman barricade. She's got a gun," Tucker said, his voice nervous. He was the one who had seen her shoot. Harlan stopped. He stared at her. He was not a man given to hesitation. But this was not in any bounty hunter's manual. This was not a frightened accomplice. This was something else. This was a reckoning. "Ma'am," Harlan said, his voice straining to be reasonable, though his eyes were cold. "This ain't your fight. Step aside. We'll talk to the deputy. About you. He's a murderer. He's going to hang. That's the law. But you just need to step aside." Clara looked at him. She looked at all of them, one by one, her gaze lingering, cold and assessing. Then she spoke, and her voice was not a plea. It was not a scream. It was a statement, as final and as hard as the canyon walls around them. "You want him," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You'll have to kill me first." Silence. The wind, small and cold, whispered through the canyon, kicking up dust. Harlan's face, which had been set in a look of grim satisfaction, tightened. He was angry. This was an inconvenience, a delay. He raised his rifle, aiming it not at her, but at the ground near her feet. "I am not in a patient mood, Missy," he snarled. "I'm not asking again." He was going to shoot. He was going to kill her, and then Levi, and he would ride back to town and say they had resisted. It was then that a new sound entered the canyon. A single horse, walking, not running, its hooves crunching on the gravel at the canyon mouth. "Harlan." The voice was new. It was calm, deep, and carried an authority that made every man in the canyon, including Harlan, freeze. They all turned. A lone rider sat on a tall black horse. He was not a townsman. He was not a hunter. He was dressed in a simple, dark suit, clean, despite the dust of the trail. He was older, in his 40s, his face lean and tired, his eyes a pale, piercing blue.
Who the hell are you?
Harlan demanded, his rifle still half raised, but his certainty broken. "My name is Marcus Thorne," the man said, his voice quiet. "Elias Thorne was my brother." The name dropped into the canyon like a stone. Elias Thorne, the murdered marshal. This was his brother. Marcus Thorne dismounted, his movement slow, deliberate. He let the reins drop. His horse stood. He looked at Harlan, at Tucker, at the townsmen, and his gaze was full of a weary, profound disappointment. "I heard the bell," Marcus said. "I got in on the morning train. Deputy Stokes told me his prisoners had escaped, and that you had all gone to retrieve federal property." He looked at Levi, then at Clara, his eyes taking in the blood, the gun, the desperation. "That," he said, "is my federal property." We got him," Harlan stammered, his confidence returning. "He's right here. He's wounded. We'll hand him over. And the woman, she shot my man, Silas, killed him." Marcus Thorne's gaze did not leave Harlan's face. "Did she?" It was not a question. He walked forward. The townsmen, sensing a shift in power, parted for him. Harlan and Tucker held their ground, but they looked uneasy. Marcus did not stop until he was standing in front of Clara. He was a tall man. He looked down at her, at the pistol in her hand. "He's dying, ma'am," he said, his voice not unkind. "Let me see him." Clara looked at him. She saw his eyes. They were not the eyes of a hunter. They were not the eyes of the law. They were the eyes of a man who, like her, had known loss. Slowly, her arm trembling, she lowered the pistol. She stepped aside. Marcus knelt in the sand beside Levi. Levi's eyes were open, just barely. He was conscious, watching, his breath a thin, bloody whistle. Marcus looked at Levi. He looked at him for a long, long time. He saw the wounds. He saw the boyish face, now gaunt and bruised. He saw the terror, and he saw the absolute, profound absence of malice. "Elias," Levi whispered, his mind delirious, seeing the family resemblance. I didn't mean the old man." Marcus Thorne's face, which had been hard, crumpled. He had heard the rumors. He had read the reports, but he had not, until this moment, understood. He stood up. He turned to Harlan. "Stand down," he said. "What?" Harlan blinked. What did you say? This is the man. He killed your brother." "No," Marcus said, his voice rising, gaining a strength that silenced the canyon. He didn't, but I knew my brother. He was a hard man, a cruel one." He looked at Harlan. At all of them. His voice full of a sudden, sharp-edged shame. "He was a bastard." The word hung in the air. I've been following this, reading the other reports, the other incidents. He was a bully. He beat prisoners. He had it coming, I suppose." He looked back at the dying man on the ground. "This one, he just got blamed." He turned to Harlan. "You're not taking him." "But the bounty!" Harlan cried, his voice full of outrage. "The $500! I have a writ!" "Your writ is for a murderer," Marcus said, his hand dropping to the pistol on his own hip. "I'm telling you, as a representative of the United States Marshals Service, that man is not the murderer you're looking for. The case is closed." Harlan stared, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He had been cheated. He had lost a man. He had lost a bounty. You can't." "I can." Marcus Thorne's voice was final. "Maybe this world needs fewer men like my brother, and fewer men like you. Harlan, now, get out." Harlan looked at Marcus. He looked at Tucker. He looked at the townsmen, who were already lowering their rifles, eager to be done with this, to be away from the hard, strange woman and the gaze of the real marshal. It was over. Harlan spat in the dust. This ain't right." "No," Marcus agreed. "It ain't now. Ride." Harlan and Tucker, their faces black with a bitter, defeated rage, turned. They stalked back to their horses. The townsmen were already mounted, riding away, not looking back. Harlan mounted, stared at Marcus for one last hateful second, and then he was gone. The canyon was silent. Clara ran to Levi. "Levi! Levi!" His eyes had closed. The tension, the adrenaline that had kept him alive, was gone. He had succumbed. He collapsed, his body going limp, the blood loss finally taking him. "No," Clara whispered, her hands on his face. "No, you don't. You don't get to die now. Not now." Marcus Thorne was at her side. "He's lost too much blood." "I know," she said, her voice frantic. She looked up at him. Help me get him on my horse." Marcus, the marshal's brother, the man who could have arrested them both, did not hesitate. Together, they lifted Levi's dead weight. He was heavier than her father had been. They hauled him, half-dragged him, and got him slumped over the saddle of her bay mare. "Where will you go?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "There's a place," Clara said. "A cabin. I remember it from when I was a child, with my father, hidden in the high rocks. They'll look for you. Harlan won't give up." "Let him," Clara said. She mounted her horse, pulling Levi's body in front of her, holding him in the saddle. "He won't find us." She looked down at the man who had, for his own reasons, just given them their lives. "Thank you." Marcus Thorne just nodded. He stepped back. I never saw you, ma'am, or him. I got here too late. The trail was cold. You understand." He was giving her a head start. He was lying. For them. Clara nodded, her eyes full of a gratitude so fierce it was almost pain. She turned the horse, and, holding the dying man who was her entire world, she rode hard out of the canyon, not looking back. She rode for a full day and into the night. She rode on pure, unadulterated memory, on a desperate, burning hope. She rode into the high desert, into the canyon she had explored as a girl, a place no one had been for 20 years. And she found it. It was just a line cabin, a small, one-room box of stone and sod, built into the side of a cliff, invisible until you were upon it. The roof had half caved in, but it was shelter. It was defensible, and it had water, a small, hidden spring bubbling from the rock just behind it. She got him inside. She laid him on a bed of old, dry pine needles. The wound in his side was a festering, angry hole. He was burning with fever, his body shaking, his breath a shallow, wet pant. He was dying. Clara did not weep. She did not pray. She worked. For days, she fought. She was a general in a war against death. She rode out, hunted a rabbit, and boiled the meat for broth. She found herbs, the ones her mother had taught her, yarrow to stop the bleeding, willow bark for the fever. She cleaned the wound, her stomach churning, forcing herself to be the hard, practical woman who had poisoned a man. She boiled water from the spring. She ripped her own petticoat into bandages. She forced water, then broth, between his cracked, feverish lips. She sat by him, wiping his face, holding him down when the fever dreams made him thrash and cry out for her, or for Elias, or for a man named Jed. She did not sleep for more than minutes at a time. She just fought. She held his hand, whispering to him, telling him about the ranch, about her mother, about the valley she would find for them. "You can't leave me," she whispered, her voice raw, in the dead of the third night, when his fever was at its worst. "I won't let you. You hear me, Levi? I chose you. You don't get to leave me now." On the 5th day, the fever broke. He woke. He did not wake to a jail cell. He did not wake to the sound of men shouting. He woke to silence, a clean, quiet silence. He was in a small, dim room. He was not in chains. He was warm. He was lying on something soft. He turned his head. His body was a distant, aching thing, but his mind was clear. Clara was there. She was asleep in a crude, three-legged chair she must have found, her head slumped on the edge of his pallet, her hand resting on his chest, right over his heart. Her face was gaunt, thinner than he had ever seen it, dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted. But she was here. She was real. He moved his hand. His fingers brushed hers. Her eyes snapped open. They looked at each other. No words. He saw her. She saw him. And Levi Callahan, the man who had been on a chain gang, the man who had been hunted and beaten and betrayed, the man who had not cried in a decade, looked at the woman who had saved him. And he wept. He did not weep silently. He wept openly, great, heaving, cleansing sobs. He cried for his lost friend. He cried for the marshal. He cried for the years he had lost. And he cried for the fact that, against all odds, he was alive and he was loved. Clara just held him. She stroked his hair, her own tears falling, and let him cry, until there was nothing left but the quiet, peaceful sound of their breathing. Weeks later, when he was strong enough to walk, when the wound had closed into a long, puckered scar, they stood on the cliff edge outside the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and deep, profound purple. He was holding the gun, the one from the first night. It's just a tool," he said, his voice quiet. "But I don't want it anymore." "I know," Clara said. He looked at her, then at the pistol. He dug a hole in the hard-packed earth with his knife. He placed the gun in it. Together, side by side, they buried it. They buried the fear, the running, the old life. They covered it with stones, a small, unmarked grave for the people they had been. Months later, they lived in a place that had no name. It was just a valley, near the Mexican border, a green, quiet place with a river that ran all year. They were known, to the few people who passed, as John and Sarah Miller. Levi, now John, worked the land. He was not a rancher, he was a farmer. He built a small adobe house with his own hands. He found peace, not in running, but in the planting of corn, in the turning of the soil, in the solid, simple work of his hands. Clara, now Sarah, was not a survivor. She was a woman who lived. She grew herbs in a garden that spilled over with green. She taught the half-dozen children of the valley to read, to write their names, to see the world as bigger than their own small piece of it. On a quiet night, in the winter, the air was cold and sharp. They sat by their fire, wrapped in a shared fur, the house quiet, the world at peace. Levi, who had been watching the flames, turned to her. He touched her face, his eyes full of a wonder that had never left him. "You had every reason to shoot me," he whispered. "That first night, in the barn, and a dozen times after. You had every reason, but you chose love." Clara looked at him. She saw the man he was, the man he had become. She saw the lines of laughter that were finally, slowly, replacing the lines of pain. She smiled. "No," she whispered, leaning in, her hand coming up to rest on his heart. "I chose us." He kissed her, and the kiss was not a desperate, hungry thing. It was not a sad, lonely thing. It was a promise. It was a home. And as they held each other, the sunrise, brilliant and gold, caught them in its first light, free at last. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West, and we hope you'll share your thoughts about the story with us in English.